Life has this funny way of sneaking up on you when you're just trying to make an honest living. One minute you're pushing a mower across someone's front lawn, focused on keeping the lines straight and the edges clean, and the next minute you're staring into the eyes of someone who makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. That's exactly what happened to me on a scorching Tuesday morning in Phoenix, and let me tell you, it changed everything. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Mario. I'm 35 years old, and I've been running Verde Landscapes with my best friend Carlos for the past 7 years. We're not talking about some massive operation here. Just two guys with a couple of trucks, some reliable equipment, and a reputation for showing up on time and doing quality work. In a city like Phoenix, where the sun beats down mercilessly and homeowners are constantly battling to keep their little patches of green alive, there's always work for guys like us who understand desert landscaping and aren't afraid of hard labor. I never planned on making a career out of yard work. After high school, I bounced around different jobs: construction, retail, even tried my hand at being a mechanic for a while. Nothing stuck until Carlos, who I'd known since we were kids getting into trouble in South Phoenix, suggested we pool our savings and start our own landscaping business. "Think about it, Mario," he'd said while we were sharing a beer after another frustrating day at our dead-end jobs. "People always need their yards taken care of, and we both know how to work with our hands. Plus, we'd be our own bosses." The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure, but something about it felt right. Those early years were rough. We started with one beat-up truck, borrowed tools, and more determination than sense. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment, wondering if we'd made a huge mistake. Carlos was the optimist between us, always talking about expansion plans and dreaming big, while I was the worrier, the one who double-checked every invoice and lay awake calculating whether we'd have enough money to make it through the next month. But slowly, client by client, we built something solid. Word of mouth is everything in this business, and it turns out that showing up consistently, doing clean work, and treating people's property like it matters goes a long way. By the time I hit 30, Verde Landscapes was doing well enough that I could afford to move out of that cramped apartment and into a small house in Ahwatukee. Nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom place with a decent-sized backyard that I kept immaculate, partly because it was good advertising, partly because I'd developed a genuine love for the work. There's something satisfying about transforming a neglected yard into something beautiful, about understanding how different plants thrive in the desert heat, about creating little oases in a landscape that can be harsh and unforgiving. The work kept me busy, maybe too busy. My sister Lisa was always on my case about my non-existent social life. "When's the last time you went on a date, Mario?" she'd ask during our monthly family dinners at my parents' house. "You can't just work all the time. You're going to wake up one day and realize you've let life pass you by." I'd shrug and make some joke about being married to my lawnmower, but the truth was more complicated than that. I'd had relationships before, nothing too serious, but they all seemed to follow the same pattern. Things would start out great: the excitement of getting to know someone new, the fun of sharing experiences, the comfort of having someone to come home to. But then life would get in the way. The business would get busy. I'd start working longer hours, spending weekends catching up on paperwork or dealing with equipment breakdowns. The women I dated would start to feel neglected, and who could blame them? They'd want more time, more attention, more of whatever I seemed incapable of giving while I was so focused on building something that felt secure and lasting. The worst was Elena. We'd dated for almost 2 years, and I'd started to think maybe this was it. Maybe I'd found someone who understood my dedication to the business and could build a life alongside it. She was patient with my schedule, supportive of my goals, and even helped me with the bookkeeping when Carlos and I were overwhelmed. But eventually, even her patience ran out. "I feel like I'm dating a ghost, Mario," she told me during our last conversation. "You're here, but you're not really here. Your mind is always somewhere else, always thinking about work, always planning the next job. I need someone who can be present with me, not someone who's just going through the motions." That breakup hit me harder than I wanted to admit. For weeks afterward, I threw myself even deeper into work, taking on extra jobs, pushing myself until I was exhausted enough to fall asleep, without thinking about what Elena had said. Carlos tried to talk to me about it, but I wasn't ready to hear it. "You're gonna burn yourself out, hermano," he warned. "The business is doing fine. You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore." But that was the thing. I felt like I did have to prove something, though I wasn't sure what or to whom. Maybe it was growing up watching my dad work 2 jobs, just to keep food on the table, coming home exhausted every night but never complaining. Maybe it was the fear that if I stopped moving, stopped pushing, everything I'd built would somehow slip away. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe I'd just gotten comfortable being alone, comfortable with the predictable rhythm of work and more work, comfortable with not having to worry about disappointing someone or not being enough. My typical day started before sunrise. I'd grab coffee and a breakfast burrito from Rosa's, the little place on the corner that had been feeding construction workers and landscapers for decades, then meet Carlos at our small office. Really, just a rented space behind a strip mall where we kept our supplies and equipment. We'd go over the day's schedule, load up the trucks, and head out to our first job. Phoenix in the summer is no joke. By 10 in the morning, the temperature could already be pushing 100 degrees, and by afternoon, working outside felt like standing inside an oven. But there was something I loved about it, about the physical challenge, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful even in those harsh conditions. Our client list had grown over the years to include some of the nicer neighborhoods around Phoenix, Ahwatukee, Chandler, parts of Scottsdale, where people had money to spend on keeping their properties looking perfect. We did everything from basic maintenance to complete landscape design. But the bread and butter of our business was the weekly and bi-weekly maintenance contracts. Show up, mow, edge, trim, blow off the walkways, check the irrigation system, and move on to the next house. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and I'd learned to take pride in the details that separated us from the guys who just showed up and went through the motions. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Carlos and I met at the office at 6:30, reviewed our route. We had 12 properties scheduled for maintenance that day, and loaded up our equipment. The first few jobs went smoothly. Mrs. Chen's place in Ahwatukee, where we'd installed a beautiful drought-resistant garden 2 years earlier. The Martinez family's house, where their kids always came out to watch us work and ask a million questions about the equipment. The apartment complex on Ray Road where the property manager always had a cooler of ice water waiting for us. It was around 10:30 when we pulled up to 1247 Desert Willow Drive, a house that had been added to our route just the month before. The previous owners had been an elderly couple who'd moved to an assisted living facility, and the house had sat empty for a few months before someone new moved in. We'd been hired by the Homeowners Association to keep the property maintained until the new owner got settled. Then they'd asked us to stay on for regular service. The house itself was typical for the neighborhood. Single-story, stucco exterior, painted in that desert beige color that every other house in Phoenix seemed to be. Red tile roof, front yard designed around native plants, and a small patch of grass that somehow managed to stay green despite the brutal summer heat. It was a nice property, well-maintained, the kind of place that suggested the owner cared about how things looked. I'd seen the new owner a couple of times from a distance, a woman who looked to be in her 40s or 50s, usually dressed in business casual, always seeming to be in a hurry as she got in or out of her car. We'd never actually spoken. She was usually gone by the time we arrived, and on the rare occasions when she was home, she stayed inside. That was fine with me. Some clients liked to hover and micromanage every detail of the work, while others preferred to just let us do our job. I'd learned to read people pretty quickly, and this one seemed like the type who wanted professional service without a lot of unnecessary interaction. Carlos was working on the backyard while I handled the front lawn and landscaping. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I had my headphones in, listening to a podcast about small business management. I was always trying to learn something new that might help us grow the company, and focusing on getting the mowing pattern just right. The grass was thick and healthy, which meant it required more attention to detail to get those clean, professional-looking stripes that made the property stand out from the neighbors who did their own lawn care. I was making my final pass along the front edge, the one that runs parallel to the sidewalk, when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. The front door had opened, and the homeowner was walking toward me. I pulled out my earbuds and shut off the mower, automatically wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my work glove. The Arizona sun was already intense, even though it wasn't quite 11 yet, and I could feel my shirt sticking to my back. As she got closer, I got my first real look at her. She was probably in her early 50s, with shoulder-length brown hair that showed hints of gray, and was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was wearing what looked like work clothes, khaki pants and a light blue button-down shirt, but there was something about the way she carried herself that suggested she was more comfortable in business attire. Her face had the kind of lived-in quality that comes with experience, laugh lines around her eyes. But there was also something else there, something that looked like worry or uncertainty. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of nervousness. "Are you Mario? The guy who runs the landscaping company?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied, pulling off my work gloves and extending my hand. "Mario Gonzalez, Verde Landscapes. You must be Ms." I realized I'd been dealing with the Homeowners Association for the billing and had never actually gotten her the name. "Sarah," she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Sarah Mitchell. I wanted to thank you for keeping the place looking so good while I was getting settled in. I know the HOA arranged for the service, but I wanted to meet you personally and let you know I'd like to continue with your company, if that works for you." "Absolutely," I said. "We're happy to keep you on the schedule. How are you liking the neighborhood so far?" She glanced around at the other houses, most of which also showed signs of our handiwork, then back at me. "It's nice. Different from what I'm used to, but nice. I moved here from Seattle, so I'm still adjusting to the desert climate. And the heat. My goodness, how do you work outside in this?" I laughed. "You get used to it mostly. The key is starting early and staying hydrated. We're usually done with the outdoor work by noon during the summer months." "Where in Seattle were you?" "Bellevue, actually. I worked in tech for 15 years. She paused, and I could see her debating whether to share more. "Big life change, moving across the country at my age. I'm still figuring it all out, to be honest." There was something in her voice, a vulnerability that caught me off guard. Most client interactions were pretty straightforward. Discuss the work, agree on the schedule, shake hands, and move on. But Sarah seemed like she needed to talk, like she was carrying something heavy and looking for a friendly ear. "That's a big move," I said. "What brought you to Phoenix?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out toward the street where a neighbor was walking their dog. "Divorce," she said finally. "My ex-husband got to keep the life we built together, and I got to start over. Phoenix seemed like a good place to do that. Warm weather, lower cost of living than Seattle, far enough away to feel like a fresh start." I wasn't sure how to respond to that level of honesty from someone I'd just met, so I went with something safe. "I'm sorry to hear about the divorce. That must have been difficult." "It was. It is." She looked at me directly then, and I could see a mixture of fear and determination in her eyes. "Can I ask you something, Mario? Do you think it's crazy for someone my age to completely start over? New city, new job, new everything?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized this wasn't just small talk anymore. This was a woman who was genuinely scared and looking for reassurance from a stranger who happened to be standing in her front yard with a lawnmower. I thought about my sister Lisa, who'd gotten divorced at 38 and spent a year convinced her life was over before she met her current husband and discovered she was happier than she'd ever been. I thought about my client Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd started her own catering business after her kids grew up and was now busier and more fulfilled than she'd been in years. "I don't think it's crazy at all," I said. "I think it takes guts. Most people stay stuck in situations that don't make them happy because starting over is scary. The fact that you had the courage to make such a big change says something about your character." She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. "Thank you for saying that. I've been having a lot of doubts lately, wondering if I made a huge mistake leaving everything familiar behind." "What kind of work are you doing now?" I asked. "I'm freelancing as a project manager, trying to build up a client base. It's been slow going, but I'm hoping it'll pick up once I get established. The independence is nice, but the uncertainty is terrifying." She laughed, but it sounded a little shaky. "Some days I feel like I'm barely holding it together, like I'm pretending to be braver than I actually am." I was struck by her honesty. by the way she was willing to admit her fears to someone she barely knew. It reminded me of something my grandmother used to say, "Mijo, the bravest people aren't the ones who aren't afraid. They're the ones who are scared but do what they need to do anyway." "I think most of us are pretending to be braver than we are," I said. "The difference is some people let the fear stop them, and others push through it." "Sounds like you're a pusher." Carlos appeared from around the side of the house, pushing the edger and looking curious about why I was having an extended conversation with a client. I introduced him to Sarah, and she thanked him for his work on the backyard before excusing herself to get ready for a client call. As she walked back toward the house, she turned and said, "Same time next week?" "We'll be here," I promised. After she went inside, Carlos gave me a knowing look. "Friendly client," he said with a grin. "Just being professional," I replied, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. There had been something about that conversation, about Sarah's openness and vulnerability, that had gotten under my skin in a way that surprised me. As we loaded our equipment back into the truck and headed to our next job, I found myself thinking about what she'd said about starting over, about pretending to be braver than she felt. I wondered what had happened in her marriage. What had given her the courage to leave everything behind and start fresh in a new place? And I realized I was looking forward to seeing her again the following week, which was definitely not just about being professional. The following Tuesday couldn't come fast enough, though I tried to convince myself it was just because I enjoyed maintaining well-kept properties. Sarah's yard had become one of those jobs where I found myself paying extra attention to details that probably didn't matter to anyone but me. The grass lines had to be perfectly straight, every edge crisp, not a single leaf left on the walkway. Carlos noticed my newfound perfectionism and wasn't shy about commenting on it. "You've mowed that same strip 3 times, hermano," he said, watching me make another pass along Sarah's front sidewalk. "Either you're developing OCD or something else is going on here." I shut off the mower and wiped my forehead with my sleeve. "I just want the work to look professional. This is a nice neighborhood, and word of mouth matters." Carlos laughed and shook his head. "Right. Professional. That's why you asked me twice yesterday what time we'd be at this house today." He wasn't wrong. But I wasn't ready to admit that Sarah had been on my mind more than I cared to acknowledge. There was something about her combination of strength and vulnerability that I couldn't shake. The way she'd opened up to a virtual stranger about her fears, the courage it must have taken to uproot her entire life at 50 and start over in a place where she knew no one. It reminded me of my own leap of faith when Carlos and I started the business. Except what she was doing seemed infinitely braver. I was putting the mower back in the truck when the front door opened. Sarah stepped out, looking more relaxed than she had the previous week. She was wearing jeans and a soft yellow t-shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in that practical ponytail. She looked younger somehow, less burdened. "Good morning, Mario," she called out, walking toward us with a smile. "Perfect timing as always." "Morning, Sarah. How was your week?" "Better than expected, actually. I landed 2 new clients, including one that could turn into a long-term contract. Small victories, right?" There was genuine excitement in her voice, and I found myself grinning in response. "That's fantastic. I told you things would pick up once you got established." "You did say that, didn't you?" She glanced at Carlos, who was loading equipment with obvious efficiency while pretending not to listen to our conversation. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but how long have you two been running your business together?" 7 years this fall," I said. "We grew up in the same neighborhood, got tired of working for other people, and decided to take a chance on ourselves." "That's impressive. It takes real partnership to make something like that work long-term. Trust me, I know how easily business relationships can fall apart." There was a hint of something darker in her voice, but she quickly shifted back to lighter territory. "Speaking of partnerships, I was wondering if I could ask a favor." "Of course. What do you need?" She hesitated, seeming to debate whether to continue. "I know this might be outside your usual scope of work, but I'm thinking about doing something with the backyard. It's pretty basic right now, just grass and a couple of desert plants, but I'd love to create more of an outdoor living space. Maybe a patio area, some shade, places to sit and actually enjoy being outside. Would you be interested in putting together some ideas for me?" I felt a surge of excitement that had nothing to do with the potential for additional revenue. Landscape design was my favorite part of the job. The creative challenge of transforming outdoor spaces into something both beautiful and functional. I'd love to take a look and put together some concepts for you. When would be a good time? Well, I'm working from home today if you have a few minutes now. I could show you what I'm thinking, and you could get a sense of the space. Carlos caught my eye and nodded toward the truck. I'll finish loading up and head to the next job. You can catch up with me there when you're done. The knowing smirk on his face told me this conversation would definitely be continued later. Sarah led me through a side gate into her backyard, and I immediately saw what she meant about it being basic. The space had good bones. It was a decent size, probably 40 by 60 feet, with mature mesquite trees along the back fence that would provide natural shade. But it was clearly designed by someone who viewed the yard as an afterthought rather than an extension of the living space. The grass is nice, I said, but it's probably costing you a fortune to keep green in this heat. You're not wrong. My water bill was a shock the first month. She walked to the center of the yard and gestured around. I keep imagining what it could be, you know. Maybe a covered patio where I could have morning coffee or work outside when the weather's nice. Some areas with different textures and colors, plants that actually belong in the desert instead of trying to pretend we're living somewhere with regular rainfall. I could already see it taking shape in my mind. A flagstone patio extending from the house, maybe in pergola for shade, native plants that would thrive in the climate and provide year-round interest. Have you thought about incorporating any water features? A small fountain or even just the sound of dripping water can make a huge difference in how a space feels. Her eyes lit up. I hadn't thought of that, but I love the idea. In Seattle, I had a little garden pond with a waterfall. Obviously nothing that elaborate here, but something that creates that peaceful sound would be wonderful. We spent the next 20 minutes walking around the yard, talking about possibilities and practical considerations. Sarah had clearly done some research. She knew about desert landscaping principles, understood the importance of working with the climate rather than against it, and had realistic expectations about maintenance requirements. But more than that, she had a vision for how she wanted to use the space, and I found myself getting excited about helping her bring that vision to life. The other thing I've been thinking about, she said, as we stood in the shade of one of the mesquite trees, is that I'd love to be able to entertain out here eventually. Nothing elaborate, just having a few people over for dinner or drinks. I haven't made many friends since moving here, but I'm hoping that will change. It will, I said, with more confidence than I felt. Phoenix can seem overwhelming at first, but there are good people here once you find your tribe. She looked at me curiously. Are you originally from here? Born and raised, South Phoenix, which is pretty different from this neighborhood, but I've lived all over the valley at different times. I found myself wanting to share more, to match her earlier openness with some of my own. My family came here from Mexico when my dad was young, and he always said Phoenix was a place where you could build something if you were willing to work for it. That's part of why I stayed, even when other opportunities came up. What kind of other opportunities? I hadn't intended to get into my personal history, but there was something about Sarah's genuine interest that made it easy to talk. I got accepted to ASU's business program when I was 25. Part-time evening classes, but it would have meant giving up the landscaping work to focus on studying and probably taking some kind of office job to pay the bills. What made you decide not to go? Honestly, fear, mostly. I was just starting to figure out that I was good at this work, that I enjoyed it, and the idea of giving that up to sit in classrooms and then behind a desk somewhere felt like moving backward instead of forward. I paused, realizing I'd never articulated that decision quite so clearly before. My sister still gives me grief about it sometimes, says I should have gotten the degree as insurance. Do you regret it? I considered the question seriously. Most days, no. I like being my own boss, working with my hands, seeing immediate results from my efforts. But there are times when I wonder what other path might have looked like, especially when I'm dealing with the business side of things and feeling like I'm making it up as I go along. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder, collecting degrees and certifications, building what everyone told me was a successful career. And you know what? I was miserable most of the time. All that security and prestige, and I felt like I was sleepwalking through my life. Is that why you left Seattle? Or was it just the divorce? She was quiet for a moment, looking out toward the back fence where a roadrunner was picking its way through the desert landscaping. Both, really. The divorce was the catalyst, but the marriage had been over for a long time before we finally admitted it. We'd built this whole life that looked perfect from the outside. Nice house, successful careers, retirement accounts, the works. But we were like roommates who occasionally argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash. I didn't know what to say to that, so I waited for her to continue. The thing that really scared me wasn't being alone. I'd been lonely for years in that marriage. It was the realization that I'd spent so much time building a life that was supposed to make me happy that I'd forgotten what actually did make me happy. She turned back to me with a self-deprecating smile. Turns out, at 50, I had no idea who I was outside of my job title and marital status. And now? Now I'm figuring it out. Some days I feel like I'm finally becoming myself for the first time. Other days I feel like I'm free-falling without a parachute. She laughed, but there was an edge to it. Yesterday was definitely a free-fall day. I had a client meeting that didn't go well. My air conditioning started making weird noises, and I spent 20 minutes on the phone with my insurance company trying to understand why my auto policy costs twice what it did in Seattle. "Welcome to Arizona," I said with a grin. "The auto insurance thing is because half the drivers here learn to drive somewhere else, and the other half learned by watching action movies." That got a genuine laugh out of her, the kind that transformed her whole face and made me want to find more ways to make it happen. "I should let you get to your next job," she said, glancing at her watch. "But I really would love to see some design ideas when you have time to put something together. I'll work on some concepts this week and email them to you. Would Friday work for a follow-up meeting to go over the options?" "Friday would be perfect. And Mario, thank you for listening. I know you're here to take care of the yard, not provide free therapy to your clients. Sometimes the two go hand in hand," I said. Besides, I enjoyed the conversation. As I walked back to my truck, I realized that was an understatement. I'd enjoyed talking with Sarah more than I'd enjoyed talking with anyone in a long time. There was something refreshing about her directness, her willingness to be vulnerable without being dramatic about it. She was dealing with real challenges, starting over professionally, building a new social network, creating a home in an unfamiliar place, but she wasn't looking for pity or trying to make her problems anyone else's responsibility. I caught up with Carlos at our next job, and he wasted no time getting to the point. "So how's the landscape design consultation going?" he asked with exaggerated innocence. "She wants some work done on her backyard. It's a good opportunity for us." "Uh-huh. And the fact that she's attractive and interesting has nothing to do with your sudden enthusiasm for design work?" I started, unloading equipment from the truck, not meeting his eyes. "She's a client, Carlos. I'm being professional." "Right. Professional. That's why you spent 45 minutes talking to her about a backyard that probably needs 15 minutes of actual assessment." The truth was, Carlos wasn't wrong. I had enjoyed talking with Sarah, had found myself drawn to her combination of strength and uncertainty, her honesty about her fears and hopes. But I also knew that getting involved with clients was generally a bad idea, and getting involved with someone who was clearly dealing with major life transitions seemed like an even worse idea. That evening, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table with a notepad, sketching out design ideas for Sarah's backyard. I told myself it was just professional thoroughness, but I knew I was putting more thought and creativity into this project than I typically did for initial consultations. I researched drought-tolerant plants that would provide color and texture throughout the year, looked up costs for different patio materials, even found a local artisan who created custom water features using recycled materials. By Thursday, I had 3 different design concepts ready to present, each with detailed drawings and material lists. I was actually excited about the Friday meeting, not just because I thought Sarah would love the ideas, but because I was looking forward to seeing her reaction, to continuing the conversation we'd started earlier in the week. Friday morning arrived with typical Arizona intensity. The temperature was already pushing 90 by the time I pulled into Sarah's driveway at 10 o'clock. She must have been watching for me, because the front door opened before I'd even gathered my materials from the truck. "Perfect timing," she called out. "I just made a fresh pot of coffee if you're interested." "That sounds great, actually. It's going to be another scorcher today." She led me inside, and I got my first look at her home's interior. It was tastefully decorated but clearly still in transition. Some rooms looked fully settled while others had the temporary feel of someone still figuring out how they wanted to arrange their new life. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with granite countertops and a breakfast nook that looked out toward the backyard. "Cream and sugar?" she asked, pouring coffee into 2 ceramic mugs. "Just cream, thanks." I spread my design sketches out on the kitchen table, suddenly nervous about her reaction. I put together 3 different concepts based on our conversation earlier this week. Each one addresses the things you mentioned: outdoor entertaining space, low water usage, and year-round visual interest. Sarah sat down beside me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something light and floral that suited her perfectly. She studied the first drawing, which featured a curved flagstone patio with a built-in fire pit and seating area. "Mario, this is beautiful," she said softly. "You really listened to everything I said." "This first option focuses on creating intimate conversation areas," I explained, trying to stay focused on the work despite her proximity. "The fire pit extends the usable season, and these raised planters would provide privacy screening from the neighbors while showcasing native plants that bloom at different times of the year." She moved on to the second design, which incorporated a larger dining area and a small outdoor kitchen setup. "And this one's for the entertainer in me," she said with a smile. "Exactly. If you decide you want to host dinner parties or larger gatherings, this gives you the infrastructure to do it comfortably. The pergola provides shade during the day, and we could add string lights or other atmospheric lighting for evening events." The third design was my personal favorite. More artistic and creative, with flowing lines, a multi-level deck system, and a custom water feature that would create both visual and auditory interest. Sarah was quiet for a long time, studying each drawing carefully. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "These are incredible, Mario. Honestly, they're better than anything I imagined. But can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you put so much effort into this? I mean, this is the kind of presentation I'd expect from a high-end design firm, not a maintenance contractor doing a favor for a client." I felt heat rise in my cheeks, caught between honesty and professional boundaries. "I guess I got excited about the project. Your backyard has great potential, and I could see how much the space meant to you." She continued to look at me steadily, and I had the feeling she was seeing right through my careful professional explanation. "Mario," she said quietly, "I'm 50 years old, recently divorced, still figuring out how to build a new life in a new place. I'm probably not the best candidate for whatever this is becoming." The directness of her statement caught me off guard, but also relieved me. At least we were acknowledging that something was happening here beyond a standard client relationship. "I'm 35, never been married, and I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to relationships," I replied. "So maybe we're both not the best candidates for whatever this is." She smiled then, the kind of smile that reaches all the way to someone's eyes. "Well, when you put it that way, maybe we're perfect for each other." The weeks that followed, our coffee and design consultation morning fell into a rhythm I hadn't expected, but found myself treasuring. Sarah had chosen a modified version of my third design concept, and we'd started the installation process, which meant I was at her house 3 or 4 times a week instead of just the usual Tuesday maintenance visits. What began as purely professional interactions gradually evolved into something more personal, though we both seemed to be dancing around acknowledging it directly. The work itself was going beautifully. We'd started with the hardscaping, removing sections of grass, grading the areas for the new patio and walkways, laying the foundation for what would become a stunning outdoor living space. Sarah had an eye for detail that matched my own, and she'd gotten genuinely excited about being involved in the process. Most clients preferred to stay inside while we worked, emerging only to approve major decisions or write checks. But Sarah was different. She'd bring out cold drinks for Carlos and me, ask thoughtful questions about our techniques, and even pitch in with some of the lighter tasks. "You don't have to help with this," I told her one Thursday afternoon as she knelt beside me, carefully placing decorative stones around the base of a newly installed desert willow tree. "This is what you're paying us for." "I know I don't have to," she replied, not looking up from her work. "But I want to understand how it all comes together. Besides, there's something satisfying about creating something beautiful with your hands instead of just sitting behind a computer all day. Carlos, who was installing drip irrigation lines nearby, caught my eye and grinned. Over the past few weeks, he'd watched the dynamic between Sarah and me develop with the interested attention of someone who'd known me long enough to recognize when I was falling for someone, even if I wasn't ready to admit it to myself. The truth was, I looked forward to our conversations as much as I enjoyed the actual work. Sarah had a way of asking questions that made me think about things differently, whether we were discussing the best placement for outdoor lighting or talking about broader life philosophy while we worked side by side in the growing heat of the Arizona morning. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said one day as we sat in the shade of her back patio, taking a break from installing the water feature that would become the centerpiece of her new outdoor space. "Sure," I replied, though I braced myself slightly. Sarah's personal questions had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things I usually preferred not to examine too closely. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's version of your life? Like you're following a script that somebody else wrote for you?" I considered the question while watching a roadrunner dart across the neighbor's yard. "What do you mean, exactly?" "Well, when I was married, I felt like I was playing this role: successful wife, career woman, member of the community. All the things I was supposed to want and be. But underneath all of that, I felt like the real me was suffocating. Like I'd gotten so good at being what everyone expected that I'd forgotten who I actually was." Her words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. "I think I understand what you mean. Sometimes I wonder if I chose this work because I genuinely love it, or because it was the path of least resistance after I got scared about college. Do you think it matters? I mean, if you're happy with where you ended up, does it matter how you got there?" "I don't know. Are you happy with where you ended up?" She was quiet for a moment, absently running her fingers through the gravel we'd been spreading around the new plantings. "I'm happier than I've been in years, even though my life is completely uncertain right now." That probably sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy at all. Uncertainty can be terrifying, but it can also be liberating. Exactly. For the first time in decades, I get to decide what comes next without having to compromise or negotiate or consider how it fits into someone else's plans. She paused, then added with a self-conscious laugh, "Of course, that freedom comes with its own set of challenges." Over the following days, I found myself thinking about that conversation more than I probably should have. Sarah's willingness to embrace uncertainty, to choose the unknown over the comfortable but unsatisfying, impressed me. It also made me examine my own choices more critically. Had I settled for safe and predictable when I could have pushed for something more challenging and rewarding? The question became more pressing when an unexpected opportunity presented itself. I was at the supply yard, loading materials for Sarah's project, when I ran into Miguel Santos, a guy I'd known casually for years, who ran a high-end landscape architecture firm in Scottsdale. "Mario, good to see you," Miguel said, walking over from his company truck. "I've been hearing good things about your work. Word is, you're doing some impressive residential projects." "Thanks, Miguel. We're staying busy." "Listen, I want to run something by you. I'm expanding my operation, looking to bring on someone with your skill set and reputation. Interested in hearing about it?" The offer caught me completely off guard. Miguel's firm designed and installed landscapes for million-dollar homes and commercial developments. Working for him would mean steady salary, benefits, exposure to high-profile projects, and the kind of career advancement I'd never seriously considered. "What would something like that look like?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite the sudden racing of my pulse. "You'd start as a senior project manager, overseeing installations and managing client relationships. Eventually, if things worked out, there could be opportunities to get involved in the design side, maybe even become a partner down the road. The starting salary would be significantly more than you're probably clearing now, plus health insurance, retirement matching, the whole package." It was exactly the kind of opportunity my sister Lisa had been telling me I should pursue for years. Financial security, professional recognition, a clear path forward instead of the day-to-day uncertainty of running my own small business. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course, take your time. But don't take too long. I'm looking to fill the position within the next month." That evening, I called Lisa to talk through the offer. As expected, she was enthusiastic about the possibilities. Mario, this sounds like exactly what you need, she said. You've proven you can do the work, and now someone's offering you a chance to do it at a higher level with real security. What's to think about? What about Verde Landscapes? Carlos and I built this business together. I can't just abandon it. You're not abandoning anything. Carlos is perfectly capable of running the maintenance side of the business, and you could probably still be involved part-time if you wanted to be. This is about your future, hermano. You can't stay small forever just because change is scary. Her words stung because they echoed some of my own doubts about whether I'd been playing it too safe for too long. But they also made me defensive about the business Carlos and I had built and the life I'd created around it. The next morning, I arrived at Sarah's house feeling unsettled and distracted. We were scheduled to finish installing the water feature and put the finishing touches on the main patio area. It should have been a satisfying day, seeing weeks of work come together into something beautiful and functional. Instead, I found myself going through the motions, while my mind churned through the pros and cons of Miguel's offer. Sarah noticed my mood almost immediately. "You're awfully quiet today. Everything okay?" "Just thinking about some business stuff," I replied, focusing on adjusting the flow rate on the fountain pump. "Want to talk about it? Sometimes it helps to get an outside perspective." I hesitated. Sarah was a client, and discussing my career uncertainty seemed like crossing another professional boundary. But she'd been so open with me about her own life transitions that it felt dishonest to keep something this significant to myself. "I got offered a job yesterday. A good job, with a bigger company, doing similar work, but at a much higher level." "That's wonderful, Mario. You should be excited." "I should be, but I'm not sure how I feel about it." She stopped what she was doing and looked at me directly. "What's holding you back?" "A lot of things. I'd be giving up the business Carlos and I built together. I'd be working for someone else again after 7 years of being my own boss. And honestly, I'm not sure I'm qualified for the kind of work they do." "Can I share something with you?" Sarah sat down on the edge of the new stone retaining wall, gesturing for me to join her. When I was offered my first management position at the tech company, I almost turned it down because I was convinced I wasn't ready for that level of responsibility. My boss at the time told me something I've never forgotten. The people who are most worried about whether they're qualified are usually the ones who are most qualified. It's the people who never question their abilities that you have to worry about. "Did you take the job?" "I did, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made. Not because the work was perfect, or because I was immediately successful, but because it pushed me to grow in ways I never would have if I'd stayed in my comfort zone. This feels different, though, more complicated." "How so?" I struggled to articulate what was really bothering me about the offer. "I guess I'm worried that if I take this job, I'll be choosing security over authenticity. Like I'll be trading the work I love for work that pays better but doesn't feel like me." Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching water trickle from the fountain we'd just finished installing. "Can I ask you something? When you're working on projects like this one, creating something from scratch, seeing it come together, how does that feel?" "It feels incredible, like I'm using all of my skills and creativity at the same time, like I'm making something meaningful that will bring joy to someone else. And when you're doing basic maintenance work, mowing lawns, trimming hedges, the routine stuff, it's fine, necessary, but not particularly fulfilling. So, maybe the question isn't whether you should take this job or not. Maybe the question is how you can structure your career to include more of the work that lights you up and less of the work that just pays the bills." Her insight hit me like a physical sensation. I'd been thinking about Miguel's offer in binary terms: take it or leave it, abandon my current life or stay exactly where I was. But Sarah was suggesting a third option, using this opportunity as a catalyst to evolve rather than as an escape route. "What if I talked to Miguel about a different kind of arrangement?" I said, the idea forming as I spoke. "What if instead of becoming an employee, I proposed some kind of partnership or subcontracting relationship? Verde Landscapes could handle the installation and maintenance side of his higher-end projects, while I could get involved in the design and project management aspects that I'm most interested in." Sarah's face lit up with excitement. "Now that sounds like you're thinking strategically instead of just reacting to circumstances. It would be more complicated than just taking a regular job. More risk, more variables to manage. But Also, more potential upside and more control over your own destiny. That afternoon, Carlos and I had a long conversation about the job offer and my evolving thoughts about our business. To my surprise, he was immediately enthusiastic about the possibility of expanding our services and taking on more challenging projects. "I've been wondering when you were going to get tired of just cutting grass," he said with a laugh. "You've got too much creativity to be satisfied with maintenance forever. If we can find a way to grow the business while keeping what works about our current setup, I'm all for it. You wouldn't mind if I started spending more time on design work and less time on the day-to-day operations? Mario, you already spend half your time sketching out ideas for clients who just want us to mow their lawns. If we can actually get paid for that creative work, it sounds like a win for everybody." The following week, I set up a meeting with Miguel to discuss alternative arrangements. I was nervous about proposing something different from what he'd originally offered, but I also felt more confident about my direction than I had in years. "Interesting idea," Miguel said after I'd laid out my proposal. "You'd essentially be an independent contractor, taking on project management and design consulting while your company handles implementation." "Exactly. You'd get someone with deep hands-on experience who understands both the creative and practical sides of the work. I'd get to expand my skills and take on more challenging projects while maintaining the independence and flexibility that I value. And if it doesn't work out, we're not locked into a traditional employment relationship that might be difficult to unwind." "Right. Lower risk for both of us, but potentially higher reward if we work well together." Miguel agreed to try the arrangement on a trial basis, starting with a large residential project in Paradise Valley that would combine landscape design with extensive hardscaping and water features. It was exactly the kind of work I'd been dreaming about taking on but had never had the opportunity to pursue. That evening, I drove to Sarah's house to share the news. Her backyard transformation was nearly complete, and I wanted to see how she was enjoying the space we'd created together. I found her sitting on the new patio, reading a book by the light of the string lights we'd installed the previous week. The fountain provided gentle background music, and the native plants we'd selected were already beginning to establish themselves in their new locations. "This is perfect," I said, gesturing around the transformed space. "You must be loving it." "I am. I had my first dinner party here last weekend. Just a few neighbors, nothing fancy. But it felt so good to finally use the space for what it was designed for." She marked her place in the book and set it aside. "You look excited about something. How did your meeting go?" I told her about my conversation with Miguel and the new arrangement we'd worked out. As I described the opportunity to take on more creative and challenging projects while maintaining the independence I valued, I realized how much Sarah's perspective had influenced my thinking. "I'm proud of you," she said when I'd finished explaining the details. "You found a way to grow without compromising the things that matter most to you. I couldn't have figured it out without your help. You made me realize I was thinking about the decision all wrong. You would have gotten there, eventually. Sometimes we just need someone to ask the right questions." As we sat together in the space we'd created, surrounded by the gentle sounds of water and the soft glow of carefully placed lighting, I realized that something significant had shifted in our relationship. We were no longer just client and contractor, or even just friends. We'd become collaborators, confidants, partners in helping each other navigate major life transitions. "Sarah," I said, surprising myself with my directness, "would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Somewhere that isn't your backyard or related to landscaping work?" She smiled, the kind of smile that starts slow and builds into something radiant. "I thought you'd never ask." "I wasn't sure if it was appropriate, given that you're my client." "Well, the project's almost finished, and even if it weren't, I think we've moved beyond strictly professional boundaries." "Is that okay with you? Moving beyond professional boundaries?" "Mario, I'm 50 years old, and I've spent the last 2 years learning to stop doing things just because they're appropriate or expected. Dinner with you sounds wonderful." As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. The new arrangement with Miguel would push me professionally in ways I'd been craving. My relationship with Sarah was evolving into something that felt both exciting and substantial, and for the first time, instead of choosing between security and authenticity, I'd found a way to pursue both simultaneously. The changes ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges and uncertainties. But sitting in Sarah's transformed backyard, seeing how beautiful something could become when you had the courage to reimagine it completely, I felt ready for whatever came next. Our first official date took place on a Saturday evening at a small Italian restaurant in Tempe that Sarah had discovered during one of her weekend explorations of the valley. She'd been systematically trying different neighborhoods, she told me, attempting to find places where she felt like she belonged rather than just existed. The restaurant, tucked into a strip mall between a yoga studio and a used bookstore, had the kind of unpretentious atmosphere that made conversation flow naturally. I have to admit something, Sarah said as we shared an antipasto platter that was larger than either of us had anticipated. I was nervous about tonight. Really? You seem like someone who handles new situations pretty well. I've gotten better at it out of necessity, but dating at 50 is terrifying in ways I never expected. It's been over 20 years since I've had to figure out if someone likes me for me, rather than for how well I fit into their existing life. I understood what she meant more than I wanted to admit. I haven't exactly been a dating success story myself. My track record suggests I'm better at maintaining landscapes than maintaining relationships. What happened with your last serious relationship, if you don't mind me asking? The question brought back memories of Elena that I usually tried to avoid examining too closely. I got so focused on building the business that I forgot relationships require actual attention and effort. She said I was physically present but emotionally absent, and she wasn't wrong. Do you think that's still true? The being emotionally absent part? I considered the question seriously, swirling wine around in my glass while I thought. I don't know, I hope not. But I've been on my own for so long that I'm not sure I remember how to make space for someone else in my life without feeling like I'm losing myself. Maybe that's the wrong way to think about it, Sarah suggested. Maybe it's not about making space for someone else. Maybe it's about finding someone who makes you feel more like yourself, not less. Her words stayed with me throughout the evening, as we talked about our respective fears and hopes, our past mistakes and future dreams. I realized that being with Sarah didn't feel like a compromise or an addition to my existing life. It felt like coming into focus, like discovering parts of myself I hadn't known were there. The evening was progressing beautifully until Sarah's phone rang during dessert. She glanced at the screen and her expression immediately shifted to something between annoyance and concern. I'm sorry, I should take this, she said, stepping away from the table. I could hear only fragments of her side of the conversation, but her tone grew increasingly tense. When she returned to the table a few minutes later, the relaxed energy between us had evaporated. Is everything okay? I asked. That was my ex-husband. There are some complications with our divorce settlement that apparently can't wait until Monday morning to discuss. She rubbed her temples with obvious frustration. I'm sorry, Mario. This is exactly the kind of drama I was hoping to leave behind in Seattle. What kind of complications? Property issues, mostly. We owned a rental house together that was supposed to be sold as part of the settlement, but the buyer's financing fell through at the last minute. Now Michael wants to restructure the whole agreement, and his lawyer is suggesting that I might need to return to Seattle to handle things in person. The thought of Sarah leaving Phoenix, even temporarily, created an unexpected knot of anxiety in my chest. How long would you need to be gone? I don't know, maybe a week, maybe longer depending on how complicated things get. She looked across the table at me with an expression that seemed to be asking for something I wasn't sure how to provide. The timing couldn't be worse. I finally feel like I'm building something good here, and now I have to deal with cleaning up the mess I left behind. I reached across the table and took her hand. We'll figure it out. Whatever needs to happen, we'll deal with it. We? She asked, and I could hear both hope and uncertainty in her voice. If you want there to be a we. I know this is all new and complicated, but I'm not going anywhere. The relief on her face was immediate and profound. I was afraid you might decide this was too much drama for a new relationship. Sarah, you moved across the country to start over at 50. You're building a freelance business from scratch and creating a new life in a place where you don't know anyone. A little leftover drama from your previous life doesn't scare me. Over the following weeks, as Sarah dealt with lawyers and phone calls and the seemingly endless bureaucracy of untangling a 20-year marriage, I got a clearer picture of what her life in Seattle had really been like. Her ex-husband, Michael, wasn't malicious, but he was manipulative in the way that people become when they're used to getting what they want through persistence and emotional pressure. He keeps suggesting that I'm being unreasonable, Sarah told me one evening as we sat in her backyard, which had become our default place for difficult conversations. He acts like I'm the one who's making things complicated by wanting a clean break. What does your lawyer say? That Michael's stalling tactics are typical for someone who doesn't want to accept that the marriage is really over. The property issue is legitimate, but it doesn't require me to be there in person. He's using it as an excuse to maintain contact and try to convince me to reconsider the whole divorce. Are you considering it? The question came out more sharply than I'd intended, revealing an insecurity I hadn't realized I was carrying. Sarah looked at me with surprise, then understanding. No, Mario, I'm not reconsidering the divorce. That decision was made long before I moved to Phoenix, and it had nothing to do with meeting you and everything to do with finally admitting that I deserved better than a marriage that made me feel invisible. Her reassurance helped, but the situation with Michael continued to cast a shadow over our developing relationship. Phone calls at inconvenient times, emails that required immediate responses, documents that needed to be reviewed and signed. The administrative aftermath of her former life seemed designed to prevent her from fully embracing her new one. Meanwhile, my work arrangement with Miguel was exceeding both of our expectations. The Paradise Valley project had been a success, leading to 2 additional contracts and the possibility of a long-term collaboration that could transform Verde Landscapes from a maintenance company into something much more substantial. You should see the referrals we're getting, Carlos told me one afternoon as we reviewed the month's financials. 3 new clients just from the work you did on the Henderson property, and Mrs. Patterson wants us to design a complete outdoor kitchen setup for her place in Ahwatukee. The professional success should have been purely positive, but it also created new pressures. Miguel was eager to take on larger and more complex projects, which meant more responsibility and longer hours for me. Carlos was enthusiastic about the business growth, but he was also starting to feel stretched thin managing the maintenance side, while I focused on design and project management. We're going to need to hire someone, I told him during one of our weekly planning meetings. Either additional crew for the maintenance work, or someone to help with project coordination. Agreed. But hiring means higher overhead, which means we need to be sure this growth is sustainable and not just a temporary upswing. The business decisions felt more complicated now that I had someone else to consider. Sarah and I had settled into a routine of seeing each other several times a week, and I found myself factoring her schedule and needs into choices that previously would have been purely professional considerations. Is it weird that I want to consult with you about business decisions? I asked her one evening as we prepared dinner together in her kitchen. Not weird at all. One of the things I hated about my marriage was how Michael and I made major life decisions in isolation from each other. We'd discuss things after the fact, but rarely before. It left me feeling like a passenger in my own life. But this is my business. You shouldn't feel obligated to help me figure out staffing issues and growth strategies. I don't feel obligated. I feel honored that you trust my judgment enough to ask for my input. Besides, you've been giving me advice about building my freelance practice for weeks. Relationships are partnerships, right? We help each other figure things out. Her perspective on partnership was different from anything I'd experienced before. Elena had always maintained strict boundaries between her career and our relationship, insisting that mixing professional and personal concerns was unhealthy. But Sarah seemed to view our connection as something that could enhance both of our professional lives rather than competing with them. The test of that philosophy came when Miguel offered me an opportunity that would require significant travel. A resort development company in Sedona wanted to completely redesign their outdoor spaces, and they were willing to pay premium rates for someone who could manage the entire project from conception through installation. It's a 6-month commitment, Miguel explained during our meeting. You'd need to be on site in Sedona at least 3 days a week, maybe more during the installation phases. But the money is substantial, and the project would establish us as a serious player in the high-end resort market. The opportunity was exactly the kind of career advancement I'd been working toward, but the timing felt impossible. Sarah was still dealing with complications from her divorce, and our relationship was at a stage where consistency and presence mattered more than grand gestures or professional achievements. That evening, I explained the situation to Sarah, expecting her to be supportive but secretly hoping she'd give me a reason to turn down the project. Instead, her response surprised me. "You have to take it," she said immediately. "This is exactly what you've been building toward. But the timing is terrible. You're dealing with all this stress from Michael, and I'd be gone half the week. Mario, I'm not going to be the reason you turn down a life-changing opportunity. I handled my life before I met you, and I can handle it while you're working in Sedona. That's not the point. I don't want to handle our relationship like it's just another item on my schedule. I don't want to repeat the same mistakes I made before." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I could see her processing not just what I'd said, but the implications behind it. "What if we approach this differently?" she said finally. "What if instead of seeing the Sedona project as something that takes you away from our relationship, we saw it as something that could enhance it? I could drive up on weekends when you're working there. We could explore the area together, make it part of our adventure instead of an obstacle to it." The idea hadn't occurred to me, but as she described it, I could see how it might work. "You'd really be okay with that kind of arrangement?" "I'd be more than okay with it. I'd be excited about it. Mario, I spent 20 years in a relationship where we were so afraid of disrupting our routine that we never actually experienced anything new together. The idea of exploring Sedona with you, of being part of your professional success instead of competing with it, sounds wonderful." Her enthusiasm was infectious, but I still had concerns. "What about your work? Your clients here in Phoenix?" "Most of my work is remote anyway. As long as I have internet access and can make phone calls, I can work from anywhere. And honestly, some time away from Phoenix might be good for me. I could use a break from Michael's constant contact and the reminders of everything I'm trying to move past." The more we talked about it, the more the arrangement seemed not just workable, but potentially transformative for both of us. I would take on the most challenging and rewarding project of my career, while Sarah would get some distance from the complications of her past and the opportunity to explore a new part of Arizona. "There's one more thing," I said as we were finalizing the details. "If we're going to do this together, if we're going to make this kind of commitment to supporting each other's goals, I think we should be honest about what we're building here." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm falling in love with you, Sarah. Not just with the idea of being in a relationship, but with you specifically. With your courage and your honesty and the way you make me want to be better than I thought I could be." Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I'm falling in love with you too, Mario. And that terrifies me more than anything else I've done since moving here." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I finally have something to lose. Again, for the first time since my divorce, I have something in my life that I can't bear the thought of messing up." I pulled her close, feeling the weight of her trust and the responsibility that came with it. "Then we won't mess it up. We'll be careful with each other. We'll communicate when things get difficult. And we'll remember that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself." As we held each other in the space we'd created together, surrounded by the plants we'd chosen and the features we'd designed, I realized that our relationship had grown the same way a landscape develops, slowly, deliberately, with attention to both the big picture and the smallest details. And like the best gardens, it was becoming something more beautiful and complex than either of us could have imagined when we first started. 6 months later, I was standing in the lobby of the Sedona resort we'd just finished transforming, watching Sarah chat with the property manager about the native plant selections we'd used throughout the grounds. The project had been everything Miguel promised and more: challenging, prestigious, and profitable enough to establish Verde Landscapes as a serious player in Arizona's luxury market. But more than that, it had proven that Sarah and I could build something together that enhanced both of our lives rather than requiring us to choose between personal happiness and professional growth. The commute between Phoenix and Sedona had become a rhythm we both enjoyed. Sarah would often drive up with me on Monday mornings, work from the resort's business center or our hotel room during the day, then explore the hiking trails and art galleries with me in the evenings. Weekends became adventures, discovering hidden swimming holes, visiting local wineries, taking photography walks through the red rock formations that had become the backdrop to our deepening relationship. "The resort manager wants to recommend us for another project," Sarah said, walking over with a satisfied smile. Apparently there's a spa resort in Scottsdale that's looking for someone to design healing gardens and meditation spaces. That sounds right up our alley, I replied, though I was more focused on the way the afternoon light was hitting her face than on the potential new business. Are you ready to head back to Phoenix? Actually, I have a surprise for you first. She led me to the resort's main outdoor terrace, where a small table had been set up overlooking the red rocks. 2 glasses of champagne sat beside a folder that looked suspiciously official. What's all this? I asked. Sit down first, she said, looking nervous in a way I hadn't seen since our first dinner date. I have some news. My mind immediately went to the worst possibilities. Michael had found some new way to complicate their divorce. Her freelance business was struggling. She'd decided Phoenix wasn't working out after all. But when she opened the folder, I saw documents that looked nothing like legal papers or business contracts. The divorce is final, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael finally signed everything last week. After 8 months of delays and complications and lawyers, it's actually over. The relief on her face was profound. But there was something else there too. Something that looked like anticipation mixed with fear. That's incredible news, Sarah. How do you feel? Free, terrified, hopeful. All at the same time. She took a sip of champagne, then set the glass down carefully. But that's not the only surprise. She pulled another set of papers from the folder. I've been offered a contract to manage project coordination for a tech startup here in Arizona. It's exactly the kind of work I love doing in Seattle, but with a company that's small enough that I could actually make a difference. Full-time salary, benefits, but mostly remote work with occasional travel. I felt a surge of excitement for her, followed immediately by a more selfish concern. That's amazing. Where would you need to relocate? That's the best part. The company is based in Scottsdale, but like I said, most of the work is remote. I could stay in Phoenix, keep the house, maintain the life I've built here. She paused, looking directly at me. The life I've built with you. The weight of what she was saying hit me gradually. Sarah had spent the past year and a half rebuilding her entire existence from scratch. She'd moved across the country, established a new career, created a home in an unfamiliar place, and navigated the emotional complexity of divorce and new love. Now, she was choosing to plant deeper roots in Arizona, making a commitment not just to the place, but to the future we'd been building together. There's one more thing, she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I know we've talked about taking things slowly, about being careful not to rush into anything too serious too quickly. But Mario, I don't want to be careful anymore. I spent 20 years being careful, and it led to a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt empty in reality. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. Not just the idea of being with someone, but specifically you. The way you approach your work with such pride and creativity. The way you make me laugh even when I'm stressed about lawyers and ex-husbands and starting over. The way you've supported my dreams while pursuing your own. I'm saying I want to build a real life with you, not just a comfortable arrangement. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Sarah, I love you too. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. These past few months, working together, exploring together, figuring out how to support each other's goals. It's shown me what partnership actually looks like. So what do we do now? I thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, the idea of making a long-term commitment would have sent me into a panic. I'd spent so many years protecting my independence, afraid that loving someone meant losing myself. But being with Sarah had taught me the opposite. Loving her had made me more confident, more creative, more willing to take risks and chase bigger dreams. I think we stop pretending this is temporary, I said. I think we acknowledge that we're building something permanent and start making decisions accordingly. What would that look like practically? Well, Carlos and I have been talking about expanding the business. With this Scottsdale spa project and the referrals from the resort work, we could probably afford to hire a full design team and take on multiple large projects simultaneously. But that would mean more travel, longer hours, and bigger financial commitments. And you've been hesitant because you weren't sure if it was worth the risk? Partly. but mostly because I wasn't sure if I wanted to build something that big by myself. It seemed lonely, even if it was successful. Sarah smiled. And now? Now I'm thinking that building something significant with someone I love sounds like the best possible life I could imagine. Even if it means less predictable income, more stress, and all the complications that come with running a growing business? Especially then. Sarah, you've shown me that the things worth having are worth working for, even when they're difficult or uncertain. I'd rather take risks with you than play it safe alone. She leaned across the table and kissed me, a kiss that felt like a promise and a celebration simultaneously. When we pulled apart, she was crying, but they were clearly happy tears. I have one more confession, she said. I've already put in an offer on a house. What? Where? 3 blocks from your place in Awatuki. It has a huge backyard that's completely blank canvas, and a workshop space that would be perfect for a home office. I thought maybe we could design the outdoor space together, as our first official collaboration as partners in business and life. The idea of designing and building a home together, of creating a space that reflected both of our visions and dreams, felt like the perfect metaphor for what we were building between us. Not just a relationship, but a true partnership that enhanced both of our individual strengths. When do we start? I asked. How about right now? That evening, as we drove back to Phoenix with the red rocks of Sedona fading in the rearview mirror, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that first morning when I'd been mowing Sarah's lawn, and she'd confessed her fears about starting over at 50. We'd both been scared. She of building a new life after divorce, me of opening my heart after years of emotional self-protection. But somehow, by being brave together, we'd created something neither of us could have achieved alone. Sarah reached over and took my hand as we merged onto the freeway heading south. No regrets? She asked. Only one, I replied. I wish I'd asked you out for dinner sooner. She laughed. I wish I'd said yes to starting over sooner. Turns out 50 isn't too late for anything, including falling in love with a man who knows how to make beautiful things grow, even in the desert, especially in the desert. As the lights of Phoenix appeared on the horizon, I realized that Sarah had been right about something she'd said months earlier. Sometimes the best things in life come when you're brave enough to stop being careful and start being authentic. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself while loving you exactly as you are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.